What I think is really interesting is, as he was kind of breaking out into his own, the comic book industry itself was growing at the same time, so there was some overlap between the two industries. And there's an interesting story about this. There's a guy named William Gaines, who was the editor-in-chief of EC Comics, which they did all the Tales from the Crypt and the Dark Horrors type comics at that time. The ones that got censored back, I guess it was in the early 1950s, during the Senate hearings on, its contribution to the delinquency of minors. And the comic book industry, in sort of a Fahrenheit 451 manner, was massively censored. And most people don't know about this because it's not something that's in your history books, because who cares about a bunch of comics that get censored. But it was censored for precisely the same reasons that a lot of these books get censored, is they were just too unpleasant. They weren't, we want happy cows, and we want, good all-American superheroes. We don't want a comic book with someone holding the decapitated head of his wife and an axe in the other hand. And so a lot of these comics were censored. But what was interesting about it is, like in Fahrenheit 451, I think it's interesting when you point this out, because a lot of people say, well, the book is about censorship, or the book is about censorship. Well, it is, but it's not really about government-instituted censorship. It's the people that censor themselves. They're like, we don't like this unpleasant stuff, and so we're going to, it's this dumbing down of America, which clearly is not happening right now. Anyways, but as it goes through, though, the comic book industry did, in similar fashion, censored itself. It created the Comic Code Authority, which basically said we're not going to do any comics that have the word terror or horror or werewolf or zombies or vampires or murder. We're going to show respect towards authority, and like all of these different rules that were going on at that time. But what was interesting is the EC Comics editor, William Gaines, I was going to get back to that, he actually, because they were always trying to come up with new stories and new ideas, during a particular busy season, they borrowed two of his Ray Bradbury short stories in 1951. It was A Strange Undertaking and The Handler, and it appears in Haunt for Fear, #6. He and Al Fieldstein did that comic, and they got away with it. So they decided to do it again. And they did it in 1952 in Weird Fantasy #12. They took his short stories, The Kaleidoscope and The Rocket Man, and they combined the stories in a story called Home to Stay. What happens is Ray Bradbury found out about this, and he wrote them a letter. And I wrote the letter down here because what Ray Bradbury said was so classy. Because if someone steals your stories, you could think of a lot of things you might say to them in a letter. Here's what Ray Bradbury said. He wrote this to William Gaines. Just a note to remind you of an oversight. You have not as yet sent a check for $50 to cover the use of secondary rights on my two stories, The Rocket Man and Kaleidoscope. I feel this was probably overlooked in the general confusion of office work, and look forward to your payment in the near future. So Gaines, being the man that he is, immediately sent him a check for $50, and from that point on, EC Comics was authorized by Bradbury to do official adaptations of Bradbury's work. And so from that point on, EC Comics took a lot of Bradbury's stuff, paid him, and then adapted it into the comics. But those two, Bradbury's career and the comic book industry, were growing at the same time. It's interesting to note that in 1970, the first year that we had the Comic-Con in San Diego, the guests of honor were Ray Bradbury and then Jack Kirby of Captain America, Fantastic Four, X-Men fame, and then also A.E. Van Voigt were also there as sort of the three big guests. And so it's interesting to see that Comic-Con, which is now a huge event in San Diego, was kicked off both by Bradbury and Kirby